back to the Corporate Sister TV. I'm Solange Lopes and I'm the founder of the Corporate Sister website and brand. In today's video, I'm discussing 3 ways that we can all advocate for more diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplaces. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, or commonly known as DEI, has been quite the buzzword for quite some time now. And it's a wonderful thing that more and more individuals, organizations, companies, and businesses are becoming more and more aware of the need for increased diversity, equity, and inclusion in and outside of the workplace. However, what often happens is that this whole DEI movement often seems to be reserved to just certain functions in the organization or certain advocating groups of people, and not extended to just everyone. There's a common myth that the work and labor of DEI, as well as the responsibility attached to it, just belongs to just a few select groups of people or a few select functions. And this is largely a myth. As a matter of fact, it's entirely a myth. The reality is that each and every one of us can contribute in advocating for increased diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplace. And here are 3 tips that may help. Tip number 1 is through education. One of the major reasons why there is such a lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, which has prompted this DEI movement, is the lack of education around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Very often, many, if not most, of the microaggressions that occur in the workplace and other violations of a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace culture happen because of ignorance and lack of education. This is where each and every one of us can come in and contribute to, 1, educating ourselves more around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also spreading and disseminating resources around DEI. These resources may be of a varied nature, from trainings to books to just having very informal conversations with colleagues, teams, and the rest of our organizations as well. Education is a big, if not the biggest part of the work of DEI, and it is so important for us to, 1, realize this, and 2, to contribute in this work of DEI by educating ourselves and also helping to educate others around our own culture, around others' culture, and around the wealth of resources that are out there in the forms of books, trainings, research, events, seminars that exist and that can reinforce the awareness and the education that we all have around diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to invest more at a personal and organizational level in sensitivity and anti-bias training. Yes, it has certainly been proven that anti-bias trainings may not be as effective as we may have thought at first. However, they still make a difference. And what this means is that each and every one of us can contribute to increasing the diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organization by willingly taking part in these anti-bias trainings, sharing them with others, and advocating for increased and even more specialized trainings in our teams, in our departments, and in our organizations. For those of us who are part of employee resource groups, promoting these trainings, encouraging these trainings could be a part of contributing to increasing the DEI work and impact in our organizations as well. And that's tip number 2. Last but not least, tip number 3 is to contribute to the culture change in our organizations. Each and every organization, company, and or business has its own culture. And this culture is sometimes a silent yet somewhat loud culture, right? It's a culture that expresses itself through the way people relate to each other, the way people communicate with each other, through the silent and not so silent policies and procedures embedded in the organization, and so many other symptoms and signs. And this is where us, each and every one of us, being part of the culture of our organizations, have the power to change this culture for the better. This can be done by introducing new aspects of this culture, from educating others, to spreading more trainings, to having informal conversations, to making it a priority in teams to consider diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of our work. This can be done through the hiring and retention of employees, especially minority employees and employees of color. This can be done through the policies and procedures that are revised or that are created within the organization. All of these changes, small and big changes, can contribute to changing the culture in our organizations. And these are changes that can happen at any level, whether it's at the macro or the micro level, whether it's at the management and executive level, or at lower levels. And these are all things that we can all chip in and contribute to help increase the impact of the DEI work in our organizations. I hope these 3 tips help. I'd be curious to learn about what you are doing in your organization in terms of DEI work in your own capacity. Please email us at corporate@thecorporatesister.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.